Welcome to the Go-to-Market Gap series. I'm Lucas Welch, HighSpot's VP of Global Corporate and Demand Marketing. We're exploring one of the biggest challenges facing go-to-market teams today, which is the gap between the strategy you think is working and the execution that might not be. This is based on findings from our latest Go-to-Market Performance Gap report. And what we're seeing is that amidst all of this AI hype, there isn't the same parallel increase in companies' ability to see that strategy turn into the consistent execution that ultimately allows them to outperform. So that's why we're here. In each episode, we're going to get different perspectives from revenue leaders across sales, marketing, enablement, operations, and more, offering their take on where the gap is and what leaders can do about it to drive the consistency that ultimately will create outperformance. Today, I'm so excited to be joined by a fellow HighSpot veteran, Haley Katzman, our VP of Global Strategic and Enterprise Sales. Haley, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Lucas.
Now, Haley, we've spent 7+ years together at HighSpot. You've been here even longer, and you have been a top performing seller, sales manager, revenue enablement, and operations leader. And now you're a sales leader for our largest accounts and enterprise teams worldwide. So I think it's safe to say that when it comes to what great sales execution looks like, you're an expert. And today, my goal is to mine some of that expertise to focus on where deals are really breaking down, how to understand that, and then particularly with great coaching and some of the new tools available to all those coaches out there, what leaders can do about it. So let's get into it. Often, Haley, it's easy to look at the end of the deal as where it broke. Oh, procurement got in the way, or a new influencer that we didn't see coming with a different exec connection showed up and changed everything. And I'm sure that in some instances, that is where the deal broke down. But I have to imagine there's more to it than that. From your lens, and especially with so much experience across the broader revenue organization, what are the patterns you see in where deals are really breaking down?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think deals can break down in many different areas. And I think why there is oftentimes a focus on the end of the sales cycle is because a lot of times sales leaders are looking at deals through the lens of just forecasting. And the reality of the situation is that the deal can be won or lost far earlier in the sales process to set you up for success at the later stages of the funnel where you need more negotiation leverage power or where you need to call on really important relationships that you've already built to have tough, hard conversations. So when you think about where they actually break down, I think a lot of times they break down in either the early discovery phases or in the middle of the funnel when you're really needing to focus on value realization, multi-threading, getting to the right personas in the account and making sure that you have a lot of breadth in the deal for who you're engaging with. And a lot of times if deals are single threaded, there hasn't been done good discovery done that's taken place, you haven't really landed the competitive differentiation, the needs analysis, the value realization, then when you get to those later stages in the sales cycle, you have to sacrifice on things like price or commercial terms. And so I think it's really important that coaching doesn't just take place through the lens of forecasting, but that it takes place earlier in the sales cycle, which ultimately will help increase win rates, have faster sales cycles because you've done all the hard, good work up front as opposed to waiting till the last minute.
Now, the value realization point, I think, is an important one because no matter what you're selling, services or products, technology or manufacturing goods, that value realization, especially more complex buying committees and buying groups, buyers that are educated or maybe miseducated by AI by the time they talk to a seller, being able to really show and prove the value they can realize from whatever the seller is selling is going to be vital in these sorts of environments. Give us a little bit more about your recommendations on how that seller can really be great in that value realization component.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's kind of two dimensions to it. I think a lot of times sellers or organizations will focus so heavily on value related to the products or the services that you're offering, which don't get me wrong, that is, of course, important. It is what you are providing to them. But I think that value realization has to be deeply tied to two elements, the company and the person that you're selling to. And so you have to really deeply understand their business, what outcomes they're trying to drive, how they operate as an organization. Are they trying to increase growth? Are they trying to, decrease bottom line savings? Like, what are they trying to do as an organization? And then what I always tell, my sellers is that you're not selling to an organization, you're selling to people, to human beings. And so in most large, complex sales cycles, you are selling to not even just five people, but you're selling to 10, 15, 20. I've been on calls with 50 people, right? And so,
Whoa,
so it
that's a
is
heck of a
critical.
Zoom call.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, thankfully. But it is really important that you have a deep understanding of what that individual's or that persona, what are their personal motivators, what matters to them, how does that tie into what matters to the organization, and then how do you take what your organization can offer, whether, like you said, it's a product, a service, whatever it may be, and how can you help them solve a challenge, help them solve a business problem that they personally and that they have as an organization. And a lot of times that value realization looks different to different teams within the organization. And so it's really critical to be able to pivot that messaging, pivot that value story, but then bring it together when you are in the later stages of the sales cycle and have to sell it to the entire organization.
And build bridges between different
Absolutely.
people in different groups to show how that value can be realized for both of them in a mutually beneficial way,
Yeah.
especially as you crest to, as you described it, those 50-person potential deal reviews, those very large buying committees in those complex enterprise environments. And that's where I'd like to go next, is with all of your experience working not just at HighSpot, but throughout your career in some of the biggest, most complex sales and deals and situations, and now complicated even further by the AI dynamics that can miseducate on the buyer side and that can even overwhelm on the sales side. Despite all that, it still comes down to, do you understand the people you're selling to and what they want? And a person, a salesperson or sales team, has to then communicate that value. When it comes to those complex enterprise deals, what are the unique characteristics of those that can trip sales teams up?
Yeah, I think that when you get to the complex enterprise deals, a lot of it is not just about the product or the service or even the value, but you have to navigate a lot of the political or people dynamics within the organization. And I think what can happen a lot of times is sometimes sellers that can be overly optimistic, or even sales managers that are coaching that can be overly optimistic, can get really excited to hear what they want to hear. and and oftentimes they're not necessarily thinking, like playing chess, right? It's
Mhm.
like playing chess instead of playing checkers. And I think you have to be three steps ahead. You have to be thinking about all the potential outcomes. You have to have a healthy, sense of paranoia.
Mm.
Optimism is still incredibly important, but you have to be able to kind of flip between that optimism and that healthy paranoia to really think critically around, well, what would make this deal not happen? Or who could be my potential blocker? Or what challenges could arise in their business that could prevent things from moving forward? And I think, what I see a lot of times is that those lessons are learned through experience. And so sometimes there is this notion that more tenured, more experienced sellers or sales leaders are going to have an advantage from that standpoint. And in many ways, they might. But I also think that you can learn from others, and you can learn from the best practices of other sellers. You can learn from the pitfalls or the lessons learned from other sellers. And the more that there is that best practice knowledge sharing, or looking at things with a more consistent critical lens from a coaching standpoint earlier in the conversation, the less likely you are going to be to have a very excited champion that's in the business misguide you through the sales process of a very complex sales cycle and get to what you think is the end of the sales cycle, but you have three detractors that you didn't even necessarily know about.
Yeah, it turns out it's just the beginning, and you
Yes.
haven't been playing chess, you've been playing checkers,
Yes.
and now it's too late. And I think that balance between optimism and paranoia is a really interesting dynamic to consider. And then parallel that with the idea that, as you said, certainly more tenured, experienced salespeople who really been through these types of situations, these complex organizations, maybe been burned a couple times, can have a
Mhm.
challenge. But today, especially through coaching, there's a lot that even newer sellers and tenured sellers can learn from the wins of others and also the mistakes of others. So
Yes.
I'd like to really drill into the coaching aspect. Coaching always been critical, often also has fallen to managers who became managers because they were great salespeople, but not necessarily great managers. So you have this idea that you need to make great coaches who maybe didn't start great coaches. And then that coaching is so instrumental in scaling those best practices. What's your lens on what really great coaching looks like in today's sales organizations?
Yeah, I mean, I think really great coaching, first and foremost, has to take a very proactive, thoughtful lens, as opposed to reactive. I think that a lot of coaches end up in management land activities as opposed to true coaching. And I think that one of the key things, and I've actually said this for like many, many, many years, I think now with technology and AI, it's become a lot easier, but it still remains, has remained true for quite some time, is that if you let the sellers bring to you what they think they need to be coached on, whether it's deals, skills, whatever it may be, you're
Mhm,
already in a bad place because most sellers don't have the level of awareness
mhm,
on where they need to be coached, or they're going to bring you the things that are the most challenging that need to be fixed rather than the ones that maybe just need a small tweak to get a win, right?
yeah.
So I think from a great coaching standpoint, you have to have a really good understanding of your seller's skills, where there are gaps. I always say the kind of will versus skill, right? Do you have people that have a skill gap or a will gap? And there's a performance management conversation versus an enablement conversation. And then from a deal standpoint, you have to have an understanding of not just which are the deals are the hardest for the reps that they need help on, but which are the ones where your coaching time and is going to have
Mhm,
the highest level of impact. Like think
mhm.
of literally the minutes that you spend with a seller. What is the ROI on those? So I would argue that, a deal that is almost like you're maybe going to win it, but it's a little bit further away is much more important to coach on the one that is like extremely hard for the rep and they're struggling and they don't know what to do. It's like that has a much like less likelihood of
Yep.
actually ever closing. But that's not the one that's going to be the one that the rep brings to you because they don't know what to do. So I
Mhm.
think being really thoughtful and strategic and proactive and as consistent as you can be, the best thing that sellers will learn from is what the other top performers are doing in their business. And so as a coach, as a manager, as a leader, you have this gift of seeing what's happening across multiple areas of the business. And the more that you can bring those gifts or those insights to your team, the more that you can up level them and scale those best practices. But it has to be applied to either the skills or the deals in a very thoughtful, proactive way where you think you're going to get the highest ROI from your time and coaching, not just what's most difficult for the seller.
That discernment of the sales manager, the leader, to determine where their input can have the biggest impact and not just follow the seller's point of view of this is where I need the most help, because there may be a low return on investment there, whereas there may be a bigger opportunity that the seller isn't quite as aware of because they're not experiencing as much pain there. But that could be the unlock, not just for a singular deal, but multiple deals. I think is
Yeah.
a really important point. And you also mentioned the balance between coaching the skills and coaching the deals. And, nothing is a zero-sum game in this world. So it's not just about you must coach the skills and it's not as important to coach the deals. Or you must coach the deals and it's not important to coach the skills. How do you think about the balance between the two? And or is there a way to bring them both together?
Yeah, I think they absolutely have to work together. I think that if you're just teaching the skills alone, sometimes the actual putting it into application of a specific scenario can get lost. And if you're just coaching to deals, sometimes it can be one and done and then not applied more broadly. Therefore, you're not getting a high ROI out of that coaching investment. And so I think that, you know, it's really interesting because I think that the skills are so foundationally important, and it's actually where you create scale.
Mhm.
Because if you think about it, it's like the analogy of teaching someone to fish, right? It's like if you can teach them pricing negotiation, if you can teach them how to do better discovery, if you can teach them value-based differentiation, those types of things, that scales to multiple deals,
Mhm.
right? Like that helps create scale in the business. Now, coaching to individual deals is where you get these like nuances by industry or vertical, by segment, by persona, by product, whatever it is, the way that the business is segmented by. And so there is that level of specification that has to happen for specific selling scenarios. And so I think it's really critical to be able to kind of find the root cause or debug where things might not be going right. Is it a deal execution related issue or is it a skill based issue? And if you don't have the underlying foundational skills, then you're not going to have very successful deals. But the deal execution is that last mile of finesse that you have to apply those skills to be incredibly successful. I think what ends up happening is that people focus on deals more because that's what's happening day in and day out.
And it's front and center.
Front and center, right? If you think about everything, if everything's just happening from a forecast lens, you're looking at the end of the sales cycle and individual deal execution. And that means that it's like too late to fix a lot of the foundational things that could have happened earlier in the deal or earlier in the building skills with the rep. And so I think doing those things earlier, again, help create scale and speed and velocity when you do want to get to have higher forecast accuracy or faster sales cycles because you've done that work up front. So it's really important that you're looking at both, and not only that you're looking at and enabling and coaching to both, but that you have a really clear way to identify or do a root cause analysis of if something's going wrong. Is this related to the skill of the seller or to the execution of the deal? Like you need to be able to discern between those two things.
And discernment with so much noise and so much activity, especially for a large team like your own, and one that's got a lot of deals cooking with sellers of different skill levels, different tenures, right? There's a lot to parse through there. So, of course, it's not go to market in 2026 if I don't mention AI. So, here we go. Let's bring AI into the conversation. How can AI help that manager, that coach? Find that discernment, be able to parse between those signals and determine, is this a skill issue? Is this a deal issue? And or maybe it's a relationship between both, so that back to your earlier point, the coaching they give can be the highest ROI coaching they can deliver.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that where AI can come into place is really both the ability to look at things from a consistent standpoint, whether it's consistency in evaluating skills, consistency in coaching, consistency in messaging, whatever that may be. But it also helps do what I mentioned earlier, which is really hard, is to figure out where should I actually coach. That's
Mhm.
where AI can come in to help find those highest ROI moments for coaching and then get a great understanding of what's actually happening. Now, the thing that's nice is that if you're using AI, you have the ability to look at a really large data set of information about the skills of the sellers and the execution of the deals. And therefore, that can start to find patterns in what good looks like, what those best practices are, and where the gap is for the current scenario that you're looking to coach into. And it takes away that, that emotional sometimes element, maybe favoritism, maybe it's the opposite,
Yes.
but it eliminates that element for coaching scenarios so that you really are kind of benchmarking against what good looks like within your organization, which is a really powerful tool to have as a coach. And I don't think it takes away from, there's such an art to selling and there's an art to coaching, and everyone does bring their own unique spin or element to the process. That's what I think makes really great sellers, is when they can bring their personality and their authenticity forward. But what we know is that there are foundational things from a skill standpoint and a deal execution standpoint that need to consistently happen to win deals. And so if you can make that part easy to coach to, and then you're having more of a conversation on the art of selling from a coaching conversation, it really changes what you're able to coach on, which is more of the strategic element as opposed to the very like tactical, tedious stuff that usually just falls to the wayside because no manager wants to coach on, hey, you didn't ask the right discovery questions, that type
Yeah.
of thing.
Exactly. So the AI is able to uh, approach and deliver the science side of
Mhm.
sales coaching and do the skill correlations with won deals and really help the coach understand where they want to focus the time on a given individual related to all the other individuals, what's working and what's not, which then creates more space for that coach to be able to focus on the nuances of the art and of
Yeah.
both a given deal and or an overall seller's performance over multiple deals. What are the artistic elements that they can collaborate on and help that seller improve? Because the AI is helping create that foundational science aspect of what to repeat again and again.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, Haley, it's been delightful so far. One final question that I'm going to be asking of all of our guests on this series, because we want to leave with something. What can you go do in the next 90 days? So, your recommendation. What can our audience do in the next 90 days to make an impact towards making their strategy turn into more consistent execution and close that performance gap?
Yeah, I would say that you should have a really clear view on what good looks like in your organization. What do the top sellers do differently that the middle and bottom performers do not? And again, that could be from a skill standpoint, that could be from a deal execution standpoint. But what are the top 3 to 5 things that they do differently, and how can you then make sure that you are enabling, coaching, scaling those skills across the rest of your organization?
There you have it, folks. Understand what good looks like. And then when you get to the point you're ready to inject AI into your go-to-market, it can help you accelerate and amplify what you already know works instead of amplifying the gaps and introducing chaos. And that's a theme we hear consistently from our customers and across the industry, is that it's identifying what good looks like so you can scale the consistently winning behaviors, the daily decisions that people make. That's the competitive advantage. AI certainly can accelerate and amplify that, and it's a very important tool. But if everyone has the same tool, what's going to set the winning organizations apart is underneath that, are they able, as Haley said, to understand what good looks like, coach to the art and the science of delivering those winning behaviors in deal after deal so your team wins again and again. Haley, thank you so much for bringing your perspective to the table. We really appreciate you being with us today.
Thank you so much, Lucas.
And thank you everyone for joining us here on the Go-to-Market Gap series. If you'd like to learn more about the research behind our latest Go-to-Market Performance Gap report, you can find all of that and more at highspot.com. Till next time, peace.